For all you professional brewers out there, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules is easier than ever with Imperial Yeast, who guarantee that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 4 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A killer deal from an incredible company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery, it is time to up your game. Check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. Last week, I was digging through our podcast archives for whatever reason, and I ended up listening to a few minutes of one of our first episodes, something I don't really do that often. My word, have we come a long way since we started this thing over 3.5 years ago. And we have all of you listeners out there to thank for that. This has been a very fun ride. We have no plans to jump off anytime soon. And here we are on our 160th episode, which means it's time for another Brü A. With me to answer your questions is contributor Phil Rusher, who I'm so happy was able to join me today.
That's right. I'm back after my long hiatus from the podcast world. Happy to be here. We're
glad to hear your voice. And, I know that you've got a little one, and that can kind of get in the way of us doing the things like this. And so it's totally understandable. But how are things going for you and the family over there in New York? This, 10th month of quarantine?
Yeah. To put it lightly, it's been bonkers. But we're getting by. We're doing pretty well. No one's been sick yet. So yeah, all things considered, we're doing fantastically well.
Good. That's great to hear. I know that things are the way things roll are different in each state and each city for that matter. And over here in California, I guess things are I was just reading an article this morning that things are looking decent, and we may be able to get back to collecting data relatively soon, over here at least. And so we're pretty excited about that. Hopefully, all our listeners out there are staying safe as well. Again, we're going to be answering your questions in this episode. Now, despite these crazy times that we're in, we do continue to get more patrons every month, which is so incredibly appreciated. It's bonkers to me how popular homebrewing seems to be during weird times like this. Which is great for us because more people want to hear, oddly enough, want to hear our voices. And so we're happy to be there for that. If you're unfamiliar with Patreon, it's a platform where people make a monthly pledge and receive rewards for their support. Our most popular tier being a unique monthly discount at YakimaValleyHops.com, which this month is $10 off each combo can pack of hops. These are the hops that they pack in cans and nitrogen seal them. It's pretty badass. So $5 to help us out while also getting $10 off really great hops. I think it's a pretty good deal if you ask me. At the $3 tier, patrons are invited to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up in November is yours truly. That's right. I've been asked a few times to redo a Q&A session, so I chose November to do that. There you have it. If you want to ask me questions, and I'm an open book, you can go become a patron at patreon.com/Brülosophy and also qualify for all those other cool rewards. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover-compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high-quality stainless fittings at great prices with super fast shipping. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brülosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Listener Yuri Kilov of Self-Made Brewery out of Moscow, Russia, holy moly, had some feedback on our last Brews Views episode. He said, while you mentioned quite a lot of adjuncts, I noticed you never mentioned tomatoes in beer. Tomato beers have been quite a hit and a big phenomenon in the Russian craft beer scene over the last 4 years. They progressed from clear Goza-like beers that look, quote, normal and taste like salty sour beers with a hint of tomatoes to real thick ketchup-looking beers, and he puts that in quotes, with spices and peppers. I personally do not like tomato styles, but from experience, the overall taste preferences for this particular style is very binary. Clients either like it a lot or completely ignore it. Your laughing is getting to me, Phil. We started selling tomato beers in the EU this year, and they've been 20 to 25% of our sales in the last few months, so we keep brewing them. I can see that EU drinkers, while being cautious, are leaving surprised yet positive reviews which makes me think European brewers haven't tapped into this style yet. This makes me wonder if U.S. brewers have brewed this style. I know for sure someone brewed a chelada beer, which is very close. The way that Yuri describes this kind of sounds to me, a little bit at least, like a Bloody Mary maybe. And I love Bloody Marys, so maybe I'd like this. I actually thought Yuri was joking at first, but he included a picture of a tomato beer. So I think this is a real thing, man.
Oh my God, that is amazing. So I'm so conflicted by this. Like, I simultaneously want this and I just want it to not exist at all. But I definitely want to try it if I ever had the opportunity.
You know, I love micheladas, and there are people out there who absolutely hate micheladas or red beers or, you know, whatever you refer to them regionally. So it's possible to me that this could be good, but if you're actually taking tomatoes and like mashing with them or fermenting them in some way, I mean, it's a fruit, so I guess it's technically a fruited beer, but it doesn't sound that good to me. But I am definitely open to trying anything, and I doubt I'm going to be brewing one anytime soon. But this does make me think of another thing, in fact. So I work in a prison, and a while ago, one of the inmates, I work with women inmates now, and one of the inmates was kind of going over all the different ways to make pruno or prison hooch. And one of the ways they do it is they save up ketchup packets and then they put like a unbaked bread because it has yeast in it. They'll add ketchup to water and mix it up. And then they put a little ball of dough in there. And they let it rip. And they said it tastes like a Bloody Mary. So, hey, maybe they're onto something over there in Russia. Who knows? Thanks for the email, Yuri. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Back in August of 2016, Jersey Tim and my brother-in-law, Uncle Joe, went to a local event, the Clovis Craft Beer Crawl, and I took a recorder with me to capture their thoughts on some of the beers we sampled, one of which was a raspberry Berliner Weiss made by 411 Ales and Spirits.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Berliner Weiss.
Heard the word Berliner Weiss.
You know when you're tired after a long day working for the state? No, for me, I don't know if anybody here has had a slush puppy blue raspberry slushy before.
I have.
But that's what this tastes like to me.
Let me see. I quite enjoy it. It's very good.
He's a learned man.
Having not had a sour beer until I met you, they're very good.
This is going to be the best thing you put in your colostomy bag all week. Nice review, you tool of the state. Grapefruit juice. It looks and tastes. It could be grapefruit juice. Carbonated, of course. I could serve this to my grandmother and she would think it was punch. She wouldn't know it's booze.
That would be a good way to get her to go to sleep, though.
Sleep, Grandma Jersey. Sleep. So the other thing you do is sometimes you pound a beer and like how much you almost puke at the end of it tells you how smooth it is and whether it's beery or not. Right? So pound them.
Very good.
No, see, that's like juice.
That didn't want to make me puke at all.
Me drinking beer makes you want to puke?
Cheers!
Oh, how far the boys have come. Timmy hadn't even heard of Berliner Weiss back then, and now I think it's one of his favorite styles. He absolutely loves sour beers, especially the kind of lighter, easy to drink Berliner Weiss styles. So I think that's pretty cool. I didn't get any grapefruit juice out of that particular beer. I'm not sure what Jers was coming from there, but I kind of get it. It was fruity enough, and the beer wasn't very beery. So yeah, my grandma would probably like it as well. It was really tasty.
Yeah, that was a really fun trip down memory lane, I think. 'Cause every time I hear Jersey and Tim talk now, it's like so much more refined and interesting, I think, to watch their progression. And anytime a beer doesn't induce vomiting, I think it's a win. So
never in my life did I think that Jersey and Tim would be described as refined, but they're making progress. I think a lot of people have noticed that. It's a lot of fun. We've got a session planned in the next about 3 or 4 weeks. Again, as things start to loosen up here in California. So if you would like to have your beer reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, Marshall@Brülosophy.com, and we will make sure it gets reviewed by them. When we return from this break, answers to your questions. Brülosophy is headquartered out of Fresno, California, a quaint city in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which has been ravaged by wildfires this season. Closest to home is the Creek Fire. In fact, I was camping with my family when it started, and we all had to be evacuated. This fire has grown to become the largest wildfire in California's history, and most of the structures destroyed were primary residences. Rebuild Our Sierra is a grassroots, long-term fundraising effort created by a few dedicated mountain people with the goal of helping those who have been affected by this wildfire. They know that when the smoke clears and the relief organizations move on, the mountains and foothills will need help to rebuild, revive, and renew. Find out more by following Rebuild Our Sierra on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to visit rebuildoursierra.org. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brülosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. We've received tons of questions since our last Brü A, so if we don't get to one that you submitted on this episode, I do apologize, but it will be answered in the future. All right, first question comes from a local buddy of mine who I know to be a fantastic brewer. His name's Ryan Hansen out of Clovis, California. He says, could you point us non-chemistry savvy brewers to a resource for an easy-to-follow guide for salt additions? I use RO and have been following the general guidance from the sheet included in the directions for my Anvil electric system. I believe that's the Foundry. But I'd like to know if there's something better. It's good, but after listening to the New England IPA episode, I'm finding it's not as comprehensive as it could be.
Yeah, there are several water calculators out there, and they all pretty much will get you exactly what you need out of it. There's several that are unpaid as well. So there's Brewer's Friend, that's an easy one that'll hit all those marks that you need to hit. Another one is the Brew and Water unpaid version, which is my favorite app or spreadsheet ever. And then the Palmer spreadsheet, which I think is probably what he has, right? Because it's all Anvil-y.
Yeah, right? John Palmer is behind Anvil, so I would imagine that it's a guide put together by John, yeah.
Yeah. So with Palmer's spreadsheet is actually really nice. I've used it a couple times. I'm not sure about what this sheet is that Ryan has, though. If he's able to really input his specific numbers and stuff like that, but I'm sure Palmer spreadsheet will do you very well. And then the latest version of Beersmith also has a water tab, which is great. You should be using Beersmith anyway, because it's my favorite building recipe builder. But yeah, the best one in my opinion has to be the Brew and Water, because it's just so comprehensive. It has everything you could possibly think of. It has even like sodium metal bisulfite calculations, which none of these other ones do.
Yeah, it is. Comprehensive is the best term for brewing water. And we had Martin Brungard on last week for our live cast Q&A session. And the guy is just a water freak, and he's awesome. And if you download the free brewing water spreadsheet, there is a tab that just explains everything to you in layman's terms. It's very easy to understand. It's how I was introduced to water chemistry. And I mean, I there's no going back for me. Water is such an important aspect. So Ryan, you and I can, hang out at some point. I can walk you through brewing water spreadsheet because we're local. But I believe actually, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think what he's referring to, the sheet that comes with the Anvil Foundry, is actually a really basic, like, if you're brewing an IPA and you're starting with this water, just add these minerals, right?
Right. Yeah,
I don't know if it's like a calculator. Maybe it is, but I know that if you're following John Palmer's lead, you're going to do well with water chemistry stuff.
Probably,
the dude's he wrote the book on water. So yeah, that's what I would do. The biggest recommendation, I think, the way that you're going to really get your feet wet, no pun intended, when it comes to brewing water, is download the free brewing water spreadsheet, look it over, and then go pay Martin for the paid one, because it's really helpful and you get some added features. Plus, you're supporting somebody who's doing something great for brewers. But there is a tab that is purely educational. You can just go read through. It walks you through how to use the spreadsheet. It's very, very good. That's how I learned. And now I use kind of this weird combo of brewing water spreadsheet and Brad Smith's Beersmith water calculator as well, just because it makes it easier since I'm designing my recipes in Beersmith anyway. So that's my answer.
Yeah, it's easily worth the $10 for the paid version.
I know. Yeah,
for the record. And like in addition to that one informational tab, on every one of the other tabs, you can read those tooltips. If you just mouse over a box, it'll give you like an exact rationale behind this is why we need this many.
Exactly.
Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
All right, the next question comes from Bruce Greenberg in Los Angeles, California. He writes, sometimes I've wondered about one aspect of keg cleaning. At the end of the cleaning process, there's water left inside the poppets. As the keg sits for a few weeks before it's used again, is there a risk of mildew growing inside the poppet and or dip tube? I fill my kegs with sanitizer, then purge with naturally produced CO2 before filling. However, this would not address the buildup of mildew or related microorganisms. One solution, of course, would be to take the keg apart and let things dry out before storing the keg, but that's a lot of work. So I've thought about running sanitizer through the keg, including the poppet valves and dip tubes after cleaning, but I don't think that would really address the problem. Moisture is moisture. Have you or anyone you know of experienced mildew growth in their keg poppets and or dip tubes?
So, well, first off, Bruce, I'd like to thank you for making me more paranoid, because this is something I'd never thought about. I don't think I've experienced that. I do have a tendency not to fully break down my kegs when I'm cleaning them. One thing I do is I run really strong. I use the Accelerator cleaner. I run that kind of through the liquid I go in and out of it to make sure it's clean inside the poppet. Maybe once a year, I'll take them fully apart and give them a nice scrub, but they always look clean to me. That may be a function of the weather where I live. It's not too moist. It's pretty dry, so things don't stay wet very long. I don't know. It seems plausible to me that mildew and mold could grow in there if it stays wet, though. I mean, now I'm worried about that, I guess. But yeah, I've never done anything extra special. I definitely don't break down my disconnects or my poppets, every time I'm leaving my kegs out to dry. Maybe you do something different, Phil. I don't know, but I'm pretty lazy, I guess, when it comes to cleaning kegs.
No, I am similarly lazy, but I do take my posts apart from time to time. Maybe twice a year, I'll fully break down each keg and make sure they're all clean. But it's definitely possible for stuff to build up in those keg posts. But with the amount of liquid that you're more or less constantly running through them, especially if it's like a cleaning solution or a sanitizing solution, you probably don't have very much to worry about. But in addition to like totally tearing everything down and taking it apart and giving it a good scrub, I will also periodically use like an iodine-based sanitizer, because it's going to kill more stuff. At least it should. So that might be something you might want to look into. But I've never seen it grow in my keg posts.
The only time I was thinking back when Bruce submitted this question, the only time that I've ever seen anything in keg posts was when I first got a keg. I believe it was from Adventures in Homebrewing. I ordered a bunch of kegs, and they do a pretty basic cleaning of them to get the soda, some of them at least, to get like the soda out of the keg. And so I break down the posts and I do all that when I receive them. And there was like a buildup of sticky soda syrup in one of the poppets. So it makes sense to me that something else could grow in there. I just, like you said, if you've got beer flowing and you don't leave those kegs out too long uncleaned, not that I've ever done that, just kind of sitting in your garage, that if you clean them out and it's just water in there and then you're using those kegs again in the next 3 or 4 weeks, I just don't think you have much to worry about, especially if I always clean after the keg is emptied and then I re-clean it again before I fill it and sanitize it. So it's not something I've worried too much about. I have an interesting way of cleaning kegs that may mitigate this issue if it were an issue. And that's that in my utility sink, I actually connected a length of hose. So it's a 1/2-inch hose that we just leave in our utility sink, and my wife uses it for cleaning stuff. I use it for cleaning my brewing stuff. Well, I have an extra liquid disconnect that with some tubing off of it that I keep just for cleaning kegs. And so I'll shove the little 3/16-inch tube into the 1/2-inch tube and kind of hold it tight, turn the hot water on, and then plug that on to the liquid post and run hot water through the post into the keg as an extra measure to make sure it's clean in there. So, and it's super hot water. So I'd imagine that's doing some good, but
yeah, absolutely. That's great. I wish I thought of it.
Yeah, if it comes to basic stuff, I'm pretty good at it. All right. Well, next question comes from Chris Necht, I believe. This is a long question here. He says, I've got a question about the mechanics of burst carbonation. I've been using the method for a while, but feel like I struggle to get my beer to carbonate in the timeframes you mentioned in your article. I get plenty of carbonation in the first pint or two, then it seems to reduce on subsequent pours. I've wondered if the way I turn down the pressure after the initial high pressure burst carbonation might be unintentionally decarbonating my beer somehow. I have a dual gauge regulator on the CO2 tank leading into a 4-way manifold. That sounds good. When burst carbonating a new keg, I turn off other kegs at the manifold, then set the regulator up to 50 psi for 8 hours or so. When it's time to turn down the pressure, I have to basically turn the knob all the way down to get the pressure gauge to show a lower reading. Okay, I already think I know the problem here. Which I've always taken to mean that the pressure in the keg isn't actually lower until it's relieved by pouring some beer off the beverage line. That is some fast pouring beer, my friend. I'll typically pour a pint or so that rockets out of the faucet like a fire hose, then set the PSI back to 12 and open the manifolds up to the older kegs again. I've encountered 2 issues from here. One, after several hours, the pressure reading on the regulator will rise on its own. Yep, that makes sense. So I'll need to repeat the pressure lowering process. I now wait to open the manifold, to older kegs until I've done this. That's a good move. And after the first pour, which seems plenty carbonated, later pours seemed undercarbonated. That's point 2, that after the first pour, it seems carbonated, but then pours after that are undercarbonated. Even an additional week at 12 PSI doesn't seem to get it there. I typically end up doing another 24 hours or more at 25 PSI. What specific steps do you take to lower the pressure on your kegs after burst carbonating? Is there anything in my current procedure that you see could be causing issues?
The thing I'm just wondering about first is what temperature the beer is when you're carbonating. So 50 psi is high, right? And if you set it that high for 8 hours, you're bound to get some good carbonation there. But it might not be enough time if it's at like 65 degrees Fahrenheit or what's that, like 17 degrees Celsius or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'm wondering. The other thing I'm wondering is, like, I think you picked up on this too, is like he's turning down the pressure after a period of time, right? So that might be leading to some of these carbonation issues as well.
Well, I'm gonna jump in. He's turning the pressure down and he's not relieving the keg of pressure. Right. When you burst carbonate, what you're doing is you're overpressurizing the beer for a period of time, and then you're going and think of it this way, Chris. You can take the gas post or the gas disconnect off at this point, turn your pressure down, but you're going to have to purge your CO2 line of that pressure to know how much pressure you got going. So you got to depress the little poppet in there to reduce the gas, to know exactly how much pressure you're going to end up putting back on the keg. But before you put it on there, you got to actually purge your keg of gas as well. You got to get that keg back down to serving pressure too. And then you can start pouring beers. If you're ever pouring and it's rocketing out, like you said, what you're doing is that bum rush is pulling a lot of carbonation out of solution. So the idea is to carbonate the beer and then bring it back down to serving pressure, is what we call it, of 12 to 14 PSI. And then I like to, even after at 50 PSI, I like to leave it there for another 2 to 3 days just to kind of balance out, get that carbonation nice and balanced out. But that's my take. To me, it sounds like what he's doing is he's just not depressurizing the keg before putting the gas back on it.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. I also think it might also be a temperature issue.
Yeah, and temperature is absolutely at play. The biggest red flag here is that he's not depressurizing the keg first, which is an absolutely necessary component. If you're going to burst carbonate, you have to do that, unless you want 2 really foamy, slightly carbonated pours, and then no more carbonation in your beer. So again, I'm just going to walk through a very simple way to do this. 50 PSI on the keg. Don't connect your beer line yet. And in fact, the only times that I've ever had issues with kegs leaking out into my keezer have when I've been burst carbonating and I leave the beer line, the liquid line attached, and I have a bad O-ring. All of that pressure it's high enough to push beer out and come through. If you have a tiny little slit or cut in your O-ring and just leak out of your liquid post. So you want to make sure, just keep it disconnected, hit it with your 50 PSI for 8 to 10 hours, take that gas post off, reduce the pressure to your gas line, reduce that down to your serving pressure, but you have to depress the poppet on the inside of your disconnect to know where that's at. It won't just go down by itself because there's all that pressure backed up in the line. And then pull your PRV or poke the gas poppet on your keg, reduce that back down, and then hit it with your serving pressure, and you should be good to go. And what you're going to do there now, if you're going in 10 hours, you're going to have to wait maybe another day or two for that in my experience, for that carbonation to balance out in the entire beer. But you're not going to have beer rocketing out of your faucet for those first couple of pours, and you should have better carbonated beer. If I didn't make that clear in the article, that's my bad. I do apologize for that, Chris. So hopefully other people out there are doing it the right way and not having these issues. And hopefully you get better carbonated beer, Chris. So
yeah, my TLDR here is let the beer sit on gas for a longer period of time.
That's the old school carbonation ways, yeah.
Or even just like a day or two. Like sometimes I'll quote unquote burst carbonate over a period of like 18 to 24 hours, sometimes even 2 days, just depending on what's going on. So I'll use a slightly lower setting on the PSI regulator, but yeah, just more time.
Yeah.
The next question comes from Sam Higgs from Ringwood, Australia. How much effect does temperature have when flavoring post-fermentation? I've recently been brewing pastry stouts to which I add vanilla beans and cacao nibs after fermentation is finished. I've let them sit at a fermentation temperature of 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius for a week or so afterwards, but I wondered if I need to maintain this temperature. If I were to cold crash at this stage, would the same amount of flavor be gained? I would have wondered this too when adding fruit. Further, when dry hopping, should I include the time it takes to cold crash in the total time that I want to dry hop?
So we know that reactions happen faster in warmer environments. And so it makes sense to me that if you're adding vanilla or cacao nibs or coffee or even dry hops, that extraction may be hastened by keeping the temperature at fermentation temperature, especially if it's 19C, that 66 degrees Fahrenheit range. That being said, one, I'm no expert on this because I don't really add things to my beer like that. So I've never made a pastry stout. So I can't speak to that on an experiential level or an anecdotal level. But I have, there's some really interesting stuff out there. Scott Janisch talks about it in his book regarding dry hopping in cooler beer. So I'm not exactly certain what he claims the benefit of doing so is, but there is some benefit, according to Scott. And I think that's interesting. I know that there are brewers out there, professional and home brewer, who will do an initial dry hop at ale temperature, so 66F or so, and then start their cold crash, and as it gets cooler, they're gradually reducing the temperature of this beer. Then they add another dry hop charge because it apparently extracts different characteristics that people like. So again, I can't say with certainty that it matters. I'm not sure. He asks, what should he include the time it takes to cold crash in his? I mean, I would, because those beers, the hops are in contact with the beer, but at the same time, I'm not too worried about dry hop time if it's less than 10 days or so, I guess. So
yeah, I concur. Actually, I was going to mention Janus too. I'm glad you brought that up, even though I haven't read his book yet. Sorry, but I know that Matt was talking about what he was saying with dry hopping at cooler temperatures, and I do trust what he would have to say because he has a lot of scientific evidence to support what he's writing about.
Yeah.
For me, like whenever I do like post-fermentation additions, they're almost always at the whatever fermentation temperature I used, which is, for most ales is going to be like 65 or so, which is pretty much right where Sam Higgs is talking about. You can get, it's interesting if you do like wood additions, it's going to be different in a barrel, but there some of those flavors you get from the wood and other things as well will come about after they get exposed to oxygen.
Right.
So having a little bit of oxidation there can be okay, depending on what you're doing. But I wouldn't worry about that too much, especially if it's only like a week. When the dry hopping too, I would definitely include that with my cold crash time, even though I never cold crash anymore because I don't have a sealed vessel that I trust will not oxidize like crazy. But yeah. I would definitely consider that with my dry hop time.
Yeah. And honestly, this is a good, we haven't done very many experiments on flavor additions outside of like dry hopping, but like, adjuncts, including vanilla and coffee and such. I do think it'd be an interesting one to look into. The temperature of the beer when those additions are made, and if that impacts, potency or some other aspect of the beer. So we'll add it to the list, Sam. And until then, I think it's a good one for you to maybe mess around with and just kind of see for yourself if you notice any differences. I'd be curious to hear from you on that. So next question, our final one for this segment comes from Chris DeMasso. He says, I have a Firmzilla all-rounder that allows for an open and accessible bottom to my fermenter. Would there be any value in using a stir plate during fermentation? I'm fairly new to home brewing and had this thought because I use one for yeast starters, which are low gravity. This is an interesting question, one in fact that our an old contributor, Greg, tested out once, and I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I've heard of this come up the past couple of years or so, and I think Brian recently made a beer this way, and his take on that beer was that it was quote-unquote fire emoji. That said, I don't know if I would bother because yeast are really good. Like they've been selected for thousands of years to do their job, and which is ferment beer, and they're very good at that. So they're pretty well able to disperse themselves throughout whatever medium they're in. So I'm not sure if supplementing with a stir plate would really be all that beneficial, but maybe with some really highly flocculent strains that might be helpful, right? Because they're going to pitter out before some other ones. But
I think the concept here is to facilitate a quicker fermentation overall. I'm not sure that it would, because what you're doing is essentially bringing oxygen in during fermentation, right, while also keeping that yeast in suspension, right? So the article that Greg did, it's kind of a difficult one to find probably. It's called The Impact of Continuous Agitation During Fermentation. That's the experiment. And he made an amber ale that we served it to 15 people and only 4 people were able to identify, the odd beer out. So it didn't come back significant. He had one beer that was constantly had a stir bar in it and was on a stir plate for however long. And the other one was fermented normally, and they tasted the same. I mean, so there's that little bit of data that we've got. I'm not sure with how healthy modern yeasts are. They're kind of, we've tamed these things into being very good at doing what we want them to do, which is ferment wort. So I'm not sure a stir plate would be helpful at all. And we've got this data showing that it didn't have much of an impact. My fermentations, when I'm pitching a nice, healthy, imperial yeast starter or even just a pouch, most of my beers under about 1055 OG they're done fermenting in 4 or 5 days. I end up leaving them alone because I'm busy doing other stuff, But I guess if you really want to turn a beer around super quick, you could give it a shot. I'm not sure it would be helpful. I was at a homebrew club meeting probably a decade ago at this point, and a guy showed up with well, you know, those 1 gallon glass jugs. They're kind of like growlers, but they look different than a growler. He showed up with one of these. It was a green one. I'll never forget that. And he's like, dude, taste this beer. He was kind of an older home brewer. So he pours me a little sample. It's this hazy mess. Tasted horrendous. He's like, yeah, man, I made this 4 days ago. He had it. He kept it on a stir plate, and he's like, dude, it fermented out so fast. For him, you know, the idea was that as soon as FG is hit, the beer's ready to drink. My gut did not agree with that beer. We'll put it that way. Either did my mouth. So that's my one anecdotal experience with that kind of a thing. So, well, we've got to cut to another break. We're going to be back with more Brü A after these messages.
The Brew in a Bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brü Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brü Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brü Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you, and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com.
All right, we've got some pretty involved questions to get to in this second half of the show, so let's jump right into it.
The next question comes from Michael Blankenship. Hey, I know you. What's up, man? The number one argument I have with my club friends that I just can't square is this. Is there any benefit to adding hops between the middle of the boil and the last 5 minutes? Aren't mid-boil hops just a waste? Isn't it possible to get similar or superior results to a traditional hop schedule with a correctly calibrated first wort hop plus whirlpool hop schedule? Here's my thinking. Lots of stuff happens to hops in the kettle, but the important ones are isomerization of alpha acids dissolving various hop flavor aroma oils into the wort, and the rapid dissipation of most of these hop VOCs, which is volatile organic compounds, through evaporation. Is there some other process or reaction I'm not thinking of that would happen to hops in half an hour differently than a full hour that would contribute something desirable to the finished beer? Also, when my friend Todd says mid-boil hops contribute flavor, quote unquote, what the hell is he talking about?
Well, I think what he's talking about is a common trope in the brewing world of bittering additions, flavor additions, and aroma additions, with the flavor additions being mid-boil. So that's probably where that's coming from, and it's just kind of an oft repeated thing. Now, my answer to your question, Michael, is the most honest answer is I don't know. I really don't know. But I've got my own bias about mid-boil hop additions based on, and I wish I could remember where I heard this, but an interview with one of my favorite breweries, Firestone Walker. they do mid-boil additions in Union Jack, and I believe they use something like an earthy English hop, Fuggles, or something like that mid-boil. And I love that beer so much that I've just come to accept that if I'm making certain styles like IPA, I'm going to do a mid-boil hop or add hop somewhere middle of the boil. Now I do a lot of short and shoddy brewing, which means that I'm bittering at 20 minutes, because I'm only boiling for 20 minutes. So it's my thinking when I approach particularly hoppy beers is to add enough of like Magnum or Horizon or something like that up front at that 20-minute mark, or even first wort hop to get the bitterness. But then I go, okay, and what would I add there if this was a 60-minute boil? And then I'll throw that in as well, and I'll kind of supplement, hoping to get some of that mid-palate fullness, which is what I love so much about really well done West Coast IPA. Is there's this middle kind of earthy spiciness on that just balances out that nice fruity late boil or dry hop character that I don't get when in my, again, anecdote, we haven't done an experiment specifically on mid-boil hop additions, which we should do. But when I've made beers that don't have that 30-minute or 25-minute boil addition of something that's not necessarily, a trendy hop, but maybe some Fuggles or Willamette or Mount Hood even, I just feel like that something's missing. And that could be just bias. It could be that I'm influenced by expectation. I don't know, but that's kind of my take on it. I don't know the real answer as to why people still do that, but I still do it. So
I think the answer to that might be if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny how I think IPA specifically is like the style of beer that people say that this really makes a big difference for. And I think Ray actually is one of those people who's like, you have to have some 20 and 30-minute additions, and otherwise it's not an IPA. But like for me, I seldom make IPAs anyway, but when I do, there's never any mid-boil additions, because I feel like it's not missing anything at that point. All of the hop flavor and aroma that I want is completely coming from the end of the boil and the dry hop.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I'm pretty sure that's the way that most commercial breweries, not that like home brewers need to emulate breweries but for any reason, but I think in this thing, it would be helpful to do that, because you get so much more out of it. There's so much more flavors coming out at that point.
I guarantee you there are people listening to this right now saying, wait a minute, man, I get full flavor. I get, great fullness of hop character from these New England IPAs that are literally hopped only after the boil is complete, right. Just in the whirlpool or whatever. Yeah, I'm not arguing with that. I don't understand how that works or what the mechanics are behind what's happening there. I have to believe on a commercial scale that wort is still very hot, so you're getting some of the same reactions. And what I'm saying is that in my personal experience, sans actual data, right? That in my personal experience, when if I'm doing a 60-minute boil and I'm making an IPA, because that's kind of what we're talking about here is hoppy beer, if I don't add that mid-boil addition of something non-fruity, I don't get that fullness of character that I'm looking for. So it could just be that the recipe, something else about the recipes that I've brewed without those is different. I don't know, but it seems to me that it does add something. And you listen to people like Vinny Cilurzo or John Kimmich, and they're brewing these beers that have that. It's the reason those beers are so popular, because they're so good. And if they're doing something like that, I don't know. I sort of take them at their word. Doesn't mean we won't test it out, but it's an easy enough thing for me to do. I guess just to kind of ease my mind. So that's where I'm at. So when I know you sort of answered this, Phil, but just to put it basically, when you're brewing an IPA, do you add a half-hour addition of something?
No.
So you do all late addition then?
Yeah, I maybe do like a 10-minute addition. And it's more or less just so I don't forget to add Whirlflock or something.
Yeah, I get that.
But yeah, that's basically it. So I'll do whatever I want. Like most of my IBUs, actually, I'd say probably half of the calculated IBUs come from the 60-minute addition.
Sure.
The rest is just 10-minute and then some Whirlpool, and that's it.
Yeah. I think that's common for people these days. I would think that in designing an experiment to test mid-boil hop additions, that given the claim that it just doesn't matter, we could probably do something like, both recipes would be identical, except for the one with the mid-boil hop addition would get something like Fuggles at 30 minutes, whereas maybe you would use the same amount of Fuggles and just toss it into the Whirlpool addition for the other one, just so they get the same amount of hops? Or would you... Would you like not even add the Fuggles to the other one and see if it even made a difference at all?
That's interesting. I think I'd be first inclined to not add the Fuggles just to see what would happen.
Yeah.
It would also be really hard to sort. Not really hard. It would be more difficult to try and make sure that they're both the same, right?
Yeah.
As far as the flavors and aromas, because if you're adding like a 30-minute edition versus whatever amount of hops you're adding in the whirlpool, but if it's at like 190 degrees, you're going to get different flavor compounds that are extracted at that point. So it's going to be different.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Michael. This one's actually got me thinking a lot. I think I'm with you, Phil, in that I would probably do just the mid-boil edition versus a beer that was otherwise identical, but without that mid-boil hop addition. Because that's going to prove, if anything, whether the mid-boil hop addition had an impact, which is really what we're curious about, right?
Yeah.
And we're not looking to say, well, it's because this and this and this happened. We just want to say, well, it's just because we added a mid-boil hop addition to that one, right? So I think that'd be a good place to start. Yeah. Thanks for the inspiration, Michael. That was a good question. Next question comes from Cole Isaacs from Sarasota, Florida. Cole says, I have had this problem a couple times where my pre-boil gravity ends up being the same as my post-boil gravity. Cole, before I read the rest of your question, I've been there, brother. Cole says, the first time this happened to me, it made sense. I got much better extraction from the mash than anticipated, so instead of doing a hard boil and making a heavier beer, I set my controller to just barely a simmer. However, I boiled a recent batch much more vigorously and had the same issue. I use a claw hammer system, and after the mash rest, I pulled the grain basket before taking a hydrometer measurement. It read 1022, which, when corrected for the temperature of the wort, was about 1039 OG. My target was 1038. I usually boil with about 80 to 85% power, but for this batch, I kept the controller at 100%. After the boil, I did a whirlpool hop at 175F, which is 79C, before chilling the wort to 86F, which is 30C, with my plate chiller. I then took a hydrometer measurement, and it read 1037 OG, which is about 1039 with temperature correction. Now I'm confused. It will still be beer, but WTF. I boiled off 1.25 gallons, or about 5 liters. I don't understand how it could possibly be the same gravity.
Yeah, so I've had mashes where I get more extraction or less extraction that I had planned for, but I've never had a boil gravity be the same as mash gravity. That's weird to me.
Yeah.
So the first thing I have to wonder about is whether or not the conversion calculator you're doing is accurate.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'm wondering about is whether or not the hydrometer is really accurate. Sometimes those things can get damaged, and if they're old, they don't really work too well. So like if you're boiling, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around this.
Yeah.
If you're boiling the wort for an hour and there's more than a gallon of water evaporated, like you're only removing water. It's impossible to volatilize these sugar compounds at this temperature. Right. So everything is staying in the wort. So there's got to be like a measuring error somewhere.
Yeah. I'm gonna say, Cole, I'm gonna recommend something. Stop doing the calculations based on temperature. It's not worth it. Your measurement of the temperature may be off. The calculator you're using may be off. If you are that concerned, either get yourself a refractometer, calibrate it, and use that, because it immediately cools the wort. And what I do with my refractometer is I put the wort on there, I close it, I make sure there's no air bubbles on the screen, on the viewing screen or whatever, and then I let it sit for about a minute just to make sure it stabilizes at room temperature or whatever it is outside. And then I take my reading. It is absolutely impossible for you to boil for an hour and 1.25 gallons and have the same OG. Something is amiss there. That is scientifically impossible. Now, I had a friend who was having this same issue, and he swapped everything out. He got new hydrometers, got a new refractometer, was measuring everything. He was boiling off at 1.5 gallons an hour, and his OGs would be close to the same. He might lose, if he was aiming for, if his pre-boil was 1050 or 1044, he'd have like his OG would end up being 1045 after an hour. That doesn't make any sense. Well, come to find out, he had made his own counterflow chiller, there was a tiny leak. So while he was chilling that water was getting in there. So if you're using a plate chiller, I'm not saying that this is for sure it, but you might want to take a look at that. If after not using these calculators to temp correct anymore, you're still having this issue, check to see if that you might be having a leak somewhere. Because if you add water to that wort, it is going to dilute it. You're going to get a lower OG. And that's sort of a, I don't know how you know for sure if you're honestly, if you're seeing a 1.25 gallon reduction in wort, that's probably not the issue, but it's something to mind. Again, there's no way this can happen in real life. So something else is amiss here. You gotta kick the old temp corrections to the side and do something a little bit more, focused. One other way, if you don't want to use a refractometer and you've got a hydrometer that you prefer, take wort samples in small taster cups, put them in your freezer for about 10 minutes and let them cool off. That's a quick way to do it. I know Denny Kahn talks about he has like a water bottle that he uses and he'll submerge that in an ice bath to cool it down really quick. You can do something like that as well. But these temperature corrections, I just don't trust too much. So that's where I'm at on that one.
I wouldn't trust him either. The refractometers on Amazon are like $20.
And they work fine.
Go for it. Yeah. The next question comes from Andrew Marin from Northeast England. I don't really have a homebrew shop that stocks all grain, so I have to grab what I can to brew. I've been brewing for 7 years, with the first 6 just being extract. Then I read about brew in a bag, and I knew I needed to go all grain. I've made about 10 batches, and I'm still learning, but I'm curious about your short and shoddy batches. I'm pretty open to brewing anything, even if I don't drink it. And as you might expect, I use Maris Otter almost exclusively. I don't want to brew lager.
No, he wants to brew lager. Yeah.
Yes. Good man. I want to brew lager and can get Pilsner malt from a local brewery. So that's not an issue. Rather, I don't have the equipment to cool it gradually. So my question, do you only do the short and shoddy batches just to test if things are particularly necessary? Or would you actually recommend it to people who, like me, don't have the equipment to brew a style in the traditional sense?
Oh, that's a good question, Andrew. So my impetus for starting the short and shoddy thing was I'm curious like a cat. My friends call me Whiskers. I wanted to see what I could get away with. I never intended for it to be a regular series on Brülosophy.com or now the Brülosophy Podcast. I was legit just curious and bored one day. And the fact that it worked out piqued my interest. And that's what ultimately led to coming up with the name Short and Shoddy and making it a real series. I don't recommend things to people. Perhaps it's because of my training as a psychologist. I'm just not an advice giver. But if somebody were to come to me and say, I really want to make a Pilsner, but I absolutely can't because I've been told by a million people that you have to ferment it cold, you have to do that. My inclination would be to share my experience that doesn't seem to be totally the case. Am I claiming that you can make equally as good quality? And by that, I don't mean good or bad. I mean, they're going to taste identical to each other if you ferment one cool versus if you ferment one warm. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that I've made a lot of beers, a lot of lagers, in fact, using these short and shoddy methods, which is a reduced mash, a reduced boil for lagers, fermenting it at ale temperature, burst carbonating. That taste really good. In fact, I've won awards with them. They get judged fairly well. So if you want to take that and use it as inspiration to do your own short and shoddy brewing because you don't have the equipment necessary to traditionally lager a beer, I think you're probably gonna be surprised with how well it turns out. But again, if you're not comfortable doing that, I'm not here to convince you to do something that I do. I don't care, but I do think it's a unique opportunity for people who don't have the ability to lager or to ferment cool. You'll see for yourself. And if you don't like it, just don't do it again.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I would just echo that you need to find something that works for you, right? And to do that, I think the best way to figure out what that process is to just try things. Don't be afraid to make bad beer. If you make a bad, if somebody says they've never made a bad beer before, they're either lying to you or themselves. So don't be afraid to make mistakes, or try new things, because that's basically how anybody learns.
So Phil, have you messed around with fermenting lagers at ale temperature?
Yeah, a couple. So I've only used a couple strains for that. I think it was just they're all imperial yeast. I've used Harvest, Global, and Urkel, and they're all super clean at ale temperatures. In fact, I think global actually is more cleaner in the mid 60s than it is in the low 50s. To me, like there's just a lot more sulfur character when it's fermented cool, which is really nice sometimes, but sometimes I don't want that, so I'll ferment a bit warmer with it.
Yeah, I've talked about it before in the past, but I did one of the first fermentation temperature experiments. So this wasn't necessarily short and shoddy, Andrew, but one of my first fermentation temperature experiments was with the Weihenstephan, very, very popular Weihenstephan lager strain. And after doing the experiment and people weren't able to tell the beers apart, there were people who were sitting there drinking the warm fermented one after I told them it was warm fermented, going, there's no way you fermented this warm. It's so clean. The big fear was, prior to my messing around with this, my big fear was that you'd create this ester, fruity estery bomb that was just not lager like at all. Now I get that there are traditionalists out there who really don't want to break from that tradition and view us doing that as disrespectful. It is definitely not our point to do that. We just like messing around with beer, and that's it. We're not trying to ruffle feathers here, but I'll tell you, it's pretty shocking to me how well lagers fermented warm turn out. I mean, I've had some cool fermented lagers that taste like crap. And that's just the fact of the matter. A lot of them actually. And when I can go and turn a Pilsner around in the same amount of time it makes me to make a blonde ale, and it tastes great, tastes better than a lot of the stuff that's out there at bars, hey, I'm not going to complain about it. And if somebody wants to diss me for doing that, I'm totally okay with it. They don't have to drink my beer. It's pretty, to me, it's just one of, again, I've said this before as well, the whole fermentation temperature experiment series has been mind blowing to me. It's opened my eyes more than probably anything else. Now, you mentioned some other yeast as well. Harvest, just a heads up, if you're using, which I believe is sourced from Augustiner,
Yep.
Harvest is one of the yeasts that we've tested that came back significant. People could reliably distinguish a Pilsner or whatever that was fermented cool from one fermented warm. But the interesting thing is, in that experiment, I believe most people thought the warm fermented one, after they took the test, was the one that was fermented cool because it was cleaner. So put that together, It really says a lot. You mentioned your cool fermented lagers tend to have a little bit more sulfur. I think over time, and the reason a lot of people end up lagering these beers over time is because that does dissipate. Whereas if you ferment it warm, it just happens faster. That's one of my kind of hypotheses about the benefits of fermenting warmer, I guess.
Yeah, that's my hypothesis as well. I don't have anything to back it up, but that's been my suspicion going at this the whole time.
So try it out, man. Everybody that not everybody, but a lot of the people who have asked me about fermenting warm, and I guess I've influenced them to give it a shot. They've come back and said that it's really good. It works out well. And I know a lot of people who when making lagers, to the chagrin of many, are specifically, fermenting warm now and just kind of sticking to that, and it's working out well. I still do both. I know Brian, he's a big fan of cold fermented lagers and feels, for however much feelings matter in science, feels that it matters, and so, hey, to each their own, but if you don't have the ability, Andrew, give it a shot. Let us know what you think. All right, final question comes from Chris Leon, who said that he purchased a pound each of the South African hop varieties offered at Yakima Valley Hops, which he found very little information on, so he made a couple single hop versions, one with Southern Passion and another with Southern Star, using my Tiny Bottom Pale Ale recipe as the base. Chris goes on to say, both of these beers turned out extremely subpar. I wouldn't say they were undrinkable, but as close as it gets without being contaminated. My first question: what's the best way to try new hops that don't have much info available in order to learn what flavors they contribute and how best to utilize them? And secondly, have any of you guys made beers with these South African hops with any sort of success? I'm hesitant to use them again, as I am now 0 for 2.
Yikes.
Yeah.
That sounds like a nightmare.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, we've all been there, though.
Yeah.
So in my humble opinion, the most economical and convenient way to try new hops is to be friends with somebody who has them. And
hey, you want to make this beer, man?
Right. Hopefully they'll let you, try them and maybe have a beer with them. Failing that, though, just buying them in a small quantity, maybe like an ounce to 4 ounces, and then doing some really basic sensory analysis on it would be a good place to start. The most basic of that is just like taking the hops themselves and sort of rubbing them in your fingers and, seeing what flavors come to mind when you smell them. You could eat them. I wouldn't recommend it, but
That's a terrible recommendation.
You could do that. You will survive. It just might not be pleasant.
Yeah, it might burn a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. The other basic sensory thing you could do is to make a hop tea, which is you can just take a small amount of water and a small amount of hops. Say, like when I do this, it's usually like something, I don't know, like 500 mLs of water, heat it up to like 170 degrees or so Fahrenheit. What is that in Celsius? 77 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
And then let it steep for like 15 or 20 minutes, and then see, and you can drink that. That will, it'll be a little bit bitter, but you'll mostly get most of the flavors and aromas that you would extract in a wort producing process. You might also, like a French press works really well for that if you have one. If not, you could also just like run it through a coffee filter. That'll work equally well if you don't want to have hops in your teeth. But that's the basic ways I would suggest getting started here.
Yeah. So testing new hops is exciting and also a little bit anxiety provoking because nobody wants to brew outside of Brülosophy. I think nobody wants to brew 5 gallons that they potentially have to dump. It's one of the risks that we embrace over here. And we rarely have to do it, which is good. But it does lead to the question, what's the best way to do it? Chris, I'm not entirely sure Tiny Bottom Pale Ale is the best base recipe for testing hops, only because that beer it's designed to have kind of to be this hybrid kind of English/American pale ale grist, and it has like Victory malt and some other stuff in it that I think can get in the way of actually learning about the hop that you're using. For that recipe, I've played around with a bunch of different hops. It really doesn't seem to work anywhere near as good with like American style citrusy hops as it does the hops that I originally designed it to have, which is like Fuggles and I believe Perle. So there's that. I'm not, you might want to try something else. Now, back before we started the Hop Chronicles, which I'll touch on here in a minute, the way that I would test new hops was by on the website. If you Google hop test bitter, you will find this recipe. It's 80% Maris Otter, 11% Crystal 60, 5% Victory, 3% Crystal, Crystal 120. The thing about that, it has Victory malt. It has all these crystal malts, but for some reason, I found that recipe is a really good way it holds up your hop of choice, whatever it is you're looking at. And so, what I do is it's like a first wort hop addition of up to about 8 IBU using the hop that you want to test out. And then at 20 minutes, there's that mid boil hop addition. I add some Willamette. And again, that's just to kind of buttress that mid flavor, if that is actually a thing. And then at 10 minutes in the boil, you add 15 grams of the hop that you're testing out, another 21 grams of hops at those same hops at 5 minutes in the boil, and then a flame out addition for a 10-minute steep with 21 grams of hops as well. And then I ferment it with an English ale yeast. I look back at this and I'm going, how in the world would I ever use this for a hop test? But people still use it and enjoy it. And it has a lot of character to it, so it doesn't get too boring. Now, when we're doing the Hop Chronicles, which is a series that is specifically focused on testing hops, single hop beers, we do, I believe it's 90% pale malt and 10% Vienna malt. And that's it. There's no crystal malt. There's no Victory malt. There's no other specialty malts. It's just pale malt and Vienna malt, both very, lightly kilned. And then we add hops you can go look up any of the Hop Chronicles recipes. You'll see the way we add hops to them. It's very consistent between them. The big complaint that we get about that is that our hopping regimen is very pale ale oriented. So if you're using a hop like Tettnanger or Satz, do you dry hop a beer when you use those hops? Not traditionally, but we have been because we really want to pull out whatever characteristics those hops do. One thing that you might do with these South African hops, Chris, is look at our Hop Chronicles stuff. I'm sure we're going to get to some of these hops at some point. But we haven't yet. But look at our Hop Chronicles recipe and try to mimic that and see what you can get away with there. I've not I think I've had one beer with Southern Passion, and it was up in Yakima last year. I don't recall it being bad. I mean, I don't really remember what it tasted like, but I didn't have a negative impression of it. From what I've heard from other people, they seem to really like those hops, though, those 4 South African varieties. So I'm not sure what's going on. I trust you that your beer wasn't contaminated, but I haven't played around with these hops at all, so I can't speak to them on a personal level.
I've not played around with them either, nor have I had any beers made with them. I know when they came out like a year ago or whatever, they're pretty much gobbled up.
Yeah.
Actually, didn't ABI have like a big stronghold on them when they first came out? I don't remember.
One of the big beer companies did, and through the work of some really dedicated people, they were able to open them up for homebrewers and brewers to use. So, but I'm not sure what the whole story is there.
Yeah, me neither. Anyway, I haven't tried them, and I'd be interested to try them, and I probably would end up doing these basic sensory things. I might not use the same hop bill as our Hop Chronicles, but I would definitely try to make a single hop beer with them. Try it again. Maybe a smaller batch though, like 1 or 2 gallons.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say is if you're not serving it to people to collect data like we do, there's nothing wrong with throwing together a quick 1 gallon batch on the stovetop and seeing what you can get away with. And this is a perfect place, in my opinion, to mess around with short and shoddy brew day stuff as well. So you can do a 1 gallon batch, brew in a bag, 20-minute mash, 20-minute boil, add all your hops, see what it tastes like, and then kind of make a determination from there whether you want to use it again. And just to clarify, I did look up a Hop Chronicles recipe here. It's 80-20 pale malt to Vienna. And then we do, again, the hopping rates that we use for this are based in part on IBU, so on alpha acid level, IBU contribution, as well as kind of a pale ale style of beer, just because we want to overemphasize the hop character. You're looking at about 12 grams up front for bittering, another 12 to 15 grams at the 15-minute mark, maybe 16 to 20 grams at the 10-minute mark. And then we do like a huge, 2 ounce, 56 grams, either late kettle or in a whirlpool. So you might go at 2 minutes left in the boil or let it steep for 15 minutes or so after you cut the flame. And then we dry hop with about 2 ounces as well. And so that's our sort of standard Hop Chronicles recipe. And we've always ferment with something clean, whether it's a lager yeast, which we've done a few times, a Kolsch yeast, but typically it's something like Imperial Yeast Flagship or Independence or something like that, because we don't want any yeast character to get in the way. That's another thing we didn't touch on, Chris, but if you're using something like an English ale strain, or, I don't want to be too obvious, but a Saison strain or something, you're going to get interactions with the hop character mixing with that yeast character as well. So just things to consider. But well, Phil, that brings us to the end of our 160th episode. I want to thank everybody again for listening and supporting us in all of the ways that you do, especially our patrons. We honestly could not do this without you. If there's anything at all you want us to answer in a future Brü A episode, please do not hesitate to submit your questions to feedback@brülosophy.com. Again, that's feedback@brülosophy.com, and make sure to indicate that it's for Brü A in the subject line. I will 100% add it to our list so that we can address it in a future episode. Phil, do you have any final words before we wrap this one up?
Keep sending questions. I love answering these. They're very interesting to think about. I look to you for inspiration.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we appreciate all of those questions. Thank you for letting us answer them on the show. Stay safe out there and make sure to head to Brülosophy.com to stay current on everything we're up to. The Brülosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.